And we continue now our examination of the Respect for Marriage Act, which passed the Senate with bipartisan support earlier this week. What does this bill really do? Was it necessary? And are there any concerns about it moving forward? Joining us now to discuss that is Delano Squires, Research Fellow for the Center for Life, Religion, and Family over at Heritage Foundation, and also a scholar at 1776 Unites. I want to ask you about that in a moment, but first, Delano, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, I mean, on the face of it, it's the respect for marriage. Everybody in America knows somebody. If they're not in a same-sex marriage of their own, they know somebody, either a family member or a friend, who is gay and maybe in a same-sex relationship or marriage. Supreme Court has already made their decision in Obergefell. What's wrong with the Senate just codifying this and saying, hey, same-sex marriage is now the law of the land?
Well, I think there are a number of issues. I think the first issue, particularly from the perspective of conservative voters, is that the redefinition of marriage is itself a problem, right? And redefining it for the purposes of the federal government, moving it from one man and one woman for one lifetime to an alternate sort of perspective on what a marriage is problem number one. But I think really where you see most conservatives keying in is the types of religious liberty issues that this will cause for people who hold to traditional views on marriage. And it's not that the church down the street is going to be forced to conduct a same-sex marriage. It's that the baker right next door may be forced to bake a cake for two men who want to get married, and that person does not have any religious protections, religious liberty protections carved out in the bill as it currently stands. And
right.
I think the amendment by Senator Mike Lee would have created those and provided those, but the Republicans who went along with all the Democrats, the 12 Republicans who went along with the 50 Democrats, chose not to take up that amendment, and that's a big part of the issue that we have now.
And we certainly saw that play out right after the Supreme Court decision. Of course, the famous issue of the baker in Colorado, where it almost seemed like activists proactively petitioned this baker to create this tension, to create the... God knows there are plenty of bakers that a same-sex couple can go to, but they specifically went after a self-professed Christian who wore his faith on his sleeve and said, hey, we want you to make this cake with this message. Use your art and use your craft to promote what we demand you promote. And that's a very real concern now, going forward, now that this might become federal law through legislation.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one of the sad parts about this, and I'm thinking of, Jack Phillips, who's been dragged into court multiple times on this type of issue, is that the same people who tell him just bake the cake would never tell, for instance, a progressive baker that they have to bake a cake that says Trump won in 2020.
Right.
Because sadly, in our country, we uphold political affiliation with more passion and vigor than we do religious belief. And I think what you'll see over the next couple of years is that there are going to be a number of people who get dragged into court. It could be the baker or photographer, or it could be a religious institution that says that adoptions to families, right, to family units, can only go to those units where there's one man and one woman in a lifelong union of marriage. And if they choose not to do so, do an adoption, let's say to two men or two women, they could find themselves in court and having potentially the tax-exempt status stripped from them.
When I'm looking at the language of this bill that's just passed the Senate, it almost looks like it's not written for same-sex couples who are in love and want to devote their lives to each other. That they've been able to do that, whether the Supreme Court said so or not. And whether the Senate says so or not, it seems like this was written for lawyers. I kept looking through it, and it really has, basically it lays out all the things that are actionable and what can then become some kind of lawsuit. This is a lawyer-driven bill, not a human-driven bill, it appears to me.
I mean, that's a great point. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to get into sort of the legal specifics of what types of actions may come from this, but obviously it talks about a private right of action, and you can anticipate several lawsuits, and we can sort of play out what those lawsuits would be in the future. But you're right. There isn't a move right now to overturn Obergefell. I also would say this. I think the inclusion of quote unquote interracial marriage in this conversation is only done for rhetorical and political effect. I haven't heard of a single bill or piece of legislation on the state level or federal level to overturn Loving. But I think Senate Democrats understand that whenever you add race into these types of intense political conversations, that is the type of thing that will make people, conservatives on the right, a lot more reluctant to oppose whatever is being proposed, because they don't want to get painted as racist, in addition to being, painted as homophobes or transphobes or, fearful of any other group.
It's such a ridiculous false analogy to draw, Delano, because, marrying interracially does not redefine what marriage is. I don't think that any person of faith has ever said, well, or at least properly or legitimately said that marriage is only defined as one man, one woman of the same race. I mean, Moses was married to a woman of dark skin. So it's such a false challenge to make. So where does this play out? Is this a no-brainer in the House? Are they going to pass this, and is this going to become law in this lame duck session? By the way, that's another aspect of this. How cowardly to wait until after the midterm elections to put this in effect and do this in a lame duck session.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I'm sure there will be organizations working in the background to try to keep this from becoming law. Because obviously, if it goes to President Biden's desk, he's going to sign it. So if it passes the House, it's as good as done. I will say this. I hope conservative voters are paying attention to the fact that it is easier to get 12 Senate Republicans to abandon their core convictions on marriage than it would be to get 12 Democrats to say anything remotely controversial or to say something to the effect of drag queens don't belong in our public schools, right? Democrats do not do that because they don't betray their voters. Republicans do on a consistent basis because for many of them, conservatism is all about conserving the sense of respectability that they feel they have in the eyes of people who hate them. And I think Republican voters and conservatives, more generally speaking, need to understand the political landscape in which they find themselves.
What a great point. 12 Republicans just affirmed same-sex marriage and redefining marriage as federal law. But I doubt you could find one Democrat in the Senate to affirm that only women can get pregnant and have a baby.
There you go. That's exactly the type of thing. So it's easier to find Republicans who will redefine marriage than it is to find Democrats who will stand on the definition of the word woman.
Right, affirm scientific reality.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Great stuff.
Correct.
Delano Squires, don't be a stranger. I'd love to talk to you further about these issues, as well as your organization you work with at 1776 Unites, but sadly we're out of time now.
Good.
Epic beard, by the way, too. I like that.
Thank you, sir.
Delano Squires Heritage Foundation. There's more to come. Keep it here on O'Connor Tonight.